Okay, and welcome back, YouTube. So now we're on to the bench section. So those of you in the podcast, you can kind of mark your timer that at around 29 minutes and 30 seconds, we're going to be getting into the bench press information. Okay? Now, so just like we said with squats, is technique is absolutely where you need to look at. So if you're having weakness in the bottom, the mid-range, or the lockout of your squat, your technique is probably misappropriate or something off in your technique in those locations. Or before you even got to those locations, and then it was just exposed by that location. The same thing is true of bench. Okay, so this is bench press information. And we're going to look at the same thing as weakness at the bottom, weakness at mid-range, and weakness at lockout. Now again, if you don't focus on your technique, if you don't improve your technique, you might be experiencing weaknesses in these particular locations of the lift that are not related to physical strength. They're related to technical strength. So you have to improve your technique first, so that way you don't just keep slamming away at a physical strength problem when it isn't physical strength. That's the problem. Okay? So, let's say we have weakness at the bottom of the bench press. Now, positional problems that might have related to the weakness in that position is as you lower the bar, you maybe didn't maintain a good squeeze in the middle of your back. You maybe didn't maintain a good leg drive and arch. Okay? So flexing through the thoracic spine and pressing through the legs to create a good stable braced arch and pressure up into that bar. So as the bar came down, you might have lost mid-back squeeze. You might have lost pressure in your legs. You might have lost pressure in your thoracic spine. So you lost positioning. So therefore, when you go to create power out of the bottom of the bench, there's nothing to create power through. You don't have any base, okay? So you want to make sure you pay attention to your position first. Now, if your position is correct, how do you build bench press at the bottom? Paused benching, so it's the same kind of concept we talked about with squats, was where you are weak, you want to spend more time at. Or you want to pick a variation of the movement that emphasizes that weakness area, okay? So paused benching is something that emphasizes that location because you're stopping the bar there, and it's going to create more time under tension there. So you would want to bring the bar down. Now, there are positional pauses. You can pause, say, 2 inches above the chest. You can pause where the bar is just lightly touching your shirt, or you can actually let the bar deload into your chest like you normally would for a competition bench, and then pause there and have to press up out of that. There are various reasons why all three of those would be correct. So some people, for example, pausing 2 inches off the chest, it forces them to stop, and that's where typically maybe they come down, the bar touches them, they go to press, but the bar stops at 2 inches off their chest. That's kind of where their dead spot is. So it's not really mid-range, it's not just on the chest, it's just off the chest. What that usually means is that they had pretty good position, they got a stretch reflex to drive the bar up off the chest, but they're just weak. They're physically weak in that location. So they would want to pause 2 inches off the chest. Now, if you have somebody who tends to, as they lower the bar down, the bar kind of drops the last 2 inches really fast, it hits them and they lose positioning, you would want them to pause on the shirt. So they'll come through that full range of motion at the same constant speed, pause the bar just as it's touching their shirt, and then they have to generate force up out of there. Because later, when you allow them to use their body, when you allow them to deload the bar into their chest, and then also use leg drive and positional drive, then all of a sudden they're going to be strong as hell, because they'll now have control of the bar plus all those power, okay, attributes. So where you pause the bench relates to exactly where you're weak and what you're weak at, whether it's positional weakness, whether it's control weakness, whether it's actual just physical drive, physical contraction weakness. So positional pauses and pausing in a bench press helps a ton. You can also do what's called overstretch benching, which would be benching with an arched bar, like a bow bar or a duffalo bar. There are also those camber bars that have like that bend in the middle. And what it does, it allows you to extend deeper. So if you had a regular bar, the bar would have hit your chest. But with these bent bars, you can go lower than that and get an overstretch on your chest. That allows you to get kind of like an overstretch in those tissues and help develop physical strength through a fuller range of motion. So then when you go to a regular bar and the bar hits you quicker than what you expected, it almost feels like the bench press is shortened, and that's going to give you more explosive power. Now, that is a dangerous one to do if you do not have good, healthy shoulders, because probably a regular bench press already extends and stretches your shoulders as much as you would want, and that would be safe. So you can really only do overstretch presses if you have very healthy shoulders. Okay? So if you have no shoulder problems, go ahead and give them a try. If you have shoulder problems, I'd probably stay away from that. Okay? So we also have banded variations will sometimes help with off the bottom. Now, sometimes people are surprised at that being true. They think of banded stuff being helpful at only the top. But if you reverse band a bench press, okay, where the bands are coming from the top, they're going to deload the weight as the bar lowers down to your chest. And you're going to say to yourself, why the hell would I want the weight lighter at my chest if I'm trying to build my chest strength? Well, you don't make it lighter. So what you do is you add weight to the bar, so that way when it's at your chest, you're at damn near maximal ability for whatever your reps want to be. So if I'm going for a set of 5, I'd be damn near right at a 5 rep max. But then as I press up, I get into heavier and heavier weights as the band deload, and that forces me to drive even harder and harder and harder and harder through the entire range of motion. What that teaches people is how to explode off the chest. So they can't be weak off the chest and then gain speed and gain power throughout the press. They have to get that speed and power right off the press, right off the chest. So reverse band benching with heavy weight, not reverse band benching with an underload, okay? So reverse band benching with a heavy weight allows you to sometimes build explosiveness off the chest. Now, let's think of mid-range. Say you have trouble benching out of the, like you can get to the bar to the bottom, you drive it up off your chest, and then about like 3 to 4, maybe even 5 inches, depending on how long your arms are, somewhere around the middle of the range, the bar just kind of stalls out. Again, you have to look at positioning. You might have bent wrists, and that's not allowing you to express your power through the barbell. You might have your elbows over flared or over tucked. You might have your, like that would be related to like your upper arm angle. Okay, so you can look at that. You might have also lost your arch. So maybe you squeeze your back. As soon as you went to press, you flared open your shoulder blades. Well, that undoes your base of the press, your strength, and you're screwed from there, and you're more likely to tear your pec, by the way. So it's really important to make sure that you maintain your arch and your mid-back squeeze throughout the pressing motion, not just on the way down. Okay? So there's all those positional concerns. That's why you have to look at technique. Now, some of my favorite ones for building mid-range strength is going to just be pausing in the mid-range. Okay? So I just want to come down, I want to stop halfway through the bent press. I can then continue down to the chest, press back up, pause again in the middle, and then press back through. We talked about that with squats, is you can do positional pauses on both the eccentric and contraction. Now, eventually the contraction pause is going to really limit how much you can lift. So once you get a pattern of that and you learn how to control your positioning, you can then get rid of the concentric pause. So you would come down on the eccentric, pause where you think your weakness is, come down the rest of the way, and drive up through that spot. Okay? Now, another thing that really helps in mid-range that most people don't pay attention to, and it's kind of hard to set up, is isometric presses. So where you set the hard supports, actually it's your mid-range, and you would want to press the bar up into the hard supports, and then try to press so damn hard you're trying to break the hard supports. So you can do isometric presses like that, and they're freaking fantastic. So Josh Bryant, who is an elite level strength coach, really awesome dude, tons of good information. You can find him on YouTube. So Josh Bryant, Bryant. He has insane knowledge on bench pressing. So I think he was the youngest person ever to bench press 600 pounds in a competition. He probably has coached the most people to bench 600 pounds. So he also is like ridiculously good at deadlifts and squats, by the way, with knowledge and performance. So he has an 800-pound deadlift with like super duper like T-Rex arms, which is probably really would be very, very, very impressive. So tons of good information. And he talks a lot about asymmetric presses. So you can look him up for more of that. So, positional pauses, isometric presses are great. And then I'm about to give 2 answers that are not a barbell bench. But screw it, they're good answers, so I want you to know them. Okay? Is dumbbell floor flies. So if you lay on the floor and you could do dumbbell flies. So search YouTube. Okay, on YouTube, search floor flies Josh Bryant. What that does is it's really awesome for developing your chest, and kind of it relates to kind of the mid-range of the press, and it's an awesome way to build strength in that spot. You can also do weighted dips where you pause at the upper arm being parallel to the floor. Okay? So you would lower yourself down, not to a full overstretch of your chest. you want to pause when your upper arm is at parallel, and then drive up out of that with focusing on a chest flex, not just a tricep extension, okay? You need to focus on your chest flexing as you're pressing through that. So those are two that I know they're not a barbell movement, but they're super duper freaking awesome, so I wanted you to know about them, okay? So, most often, when people miss at mid-range, it's a lot of positional problems, so make sure your technique is good. And then, like we said, you can do positional pauses, you can do isometric presses, you can do those dumbbell door floor flies, and you can do weighted dips, okay? The next thing we have is weakness at lockout. Again, you have to look at position. So you might have driven up to the top, but you lost all of your arch, you lost your leg drive, maybe your wrists have bent by then, your elbow placement is out of place, so you're over-tucked, over-flared, so you need to look at all that. You can use bands and chains. Again, they help overload the top of the motion, therefore you can help spend more time on retention and more stress in that area. You can use a slingshot by Mark Bell, howmuchyoubench.net. That slingshot is freaking awesome because it helps you off the chest, but it doesn't help you at all in the lockout, which is pretty much what bands and chains do, is they emphasize the lockout. People sometimes like board presses, and they'll do board presses for that mid-range or the lockout. I don't think they're very good. I don't like them. So because what you'll end up doing is you come down, you dump the weight into the board, and then you try to press up out of that, which does not mimic the full range of motion of a movement. So just like we talked about before in the podcast, you want to find variations that allow you to use full range if you can, because that way you maintain technique proficiency and or improve technique as you're building physical strength, okay? So, the person who sent the question also asked about, what about a touch and go bench, where you just kind of like, just drop it down, bounce off your chest, and just drive? Is that a good way to do an overload where maybe you can use a little heavier range of motion? No. Do the bands, do the chains, do the slingshot, because with those you get the overload, but you can still maintain good form. So you don't want to do a touch and go bench where your form goes to shit just to try to get an extra little bit of weight out of it, because what do you think you're going to do when you translate to your 1 rep max? So if your body learned, hey, doing shit technique and just bouncing the bar off me makes me stronger, oh crap, now I'm being tested by my strength, what do you think it's going to do? It's going to do the thing where you bounce the bar off your chest. So if you're missing press commands, or you're not waiting for a press command because your body's freaking out and just wants to bounce the bar off you, practicing that in your training is not good. So you want to get rid of touch and go benching. So use bands, chains, or slingshots to do your overload. Okay? So that is all of the bench press information. Again, that's a lot of information, but I wanted to kind of give that section. And if you want more information just on bench pressing, again, send us an email, brutalirongym@gmail.com, and we'll spend a full 30-minute podcast on just bench pressing. But again, that's good basics, good information to get started at. Okay? So what we're going to do now is we're going to go into conventional and sumo deadlifts. I'm going to try to cover them all in kind of one go. So again, for you listeners on the podcast, give me 1 second as I transition our YouTube video. So hello, YouTube listeners. So this was the bench sections. This would be kind of part 2. So make sure you check out part 1, which is the whole background information of what we're doing in this podcast, and then it talks about squats. So this part is just bench press, but make sure you listen to the first part too. Okay? Cool. So now we're going to stop your video, and we're going to come back for part 3 with the deadlifts. Cool.